Um, Very busy. Trying to make the best of not having a lot of shows. You know, that show started again a little bit, but it's still lots of lockdowns and disruption to touring. So yeah, I've been working on lots of studio projects. So it's been nice. Yeah, it's been a good time. Right. Yeah, yeah. The new album has been dominating a lot of time recently. Yeah, just been the last few months been working on the Dolby Atmos mix, so doing a special audio mix of the whole album to make a movie version of the album. So it's, as with my other albums, it's a visual project as well as an audio project, and we've done the whole thing in this sort of cinema format. So yeah, that's been the last few months. Yeah, it was. I mean, the new album was written during the last couple of years. Whenever I have been on my own a lot and not able to tour and not able to collaborate as much in person. So it was very a sort of inward-looking album where I decided to try and communicate things that I couldn't put into words. So the idea, it's called unspoken words, and I was trying to communicate ideas that I could put into music. So a lot of the time I find it's easier to express internal states musically or with art than it is to actually say them literally with words. So that was the sort of premise of the project. So I explored that in lots of different ways. But it was very much a project that came from the process of um, the isolation and just inward looking for a long time led to this album essentially. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've since my first release, I've worked with visual artists. I just always felt that it was my work was only half complete whenever it was only the music. Um, I love visual art, and I discovered after working with visual artists that it was a great way to communicate ideas that I was interested in outside of music. Um, Particularly my background in sciences and my love of natural forms and structures and ideas were really amenable to putting into videos, and it was a way that I could communicate things which I could then link back to the music as well and tell a story, which became much more interesting for me. It just made my job more interesting essentially, and it spawned ideas. Trying to think of visual ideas always makes me think of new ideas musically, and then it lends itself to shows as well. Eventually I realized, oh, I can start to use music video content for live shows, and I started getting into doing VJing essentially, and then VJing became a really big part of what I do. I love VJing, so then I got into mapping to, you mentioned the Acropolis, this Herodotus Atticus Theatre at the Acropolis, mapping to all the structures, and I can create a spectacle by myself. I can tour with a couple of laptops and my controllers, and I can create this big spectacle, which yeah, it just became something that I could express myself with outside of just the music. So it turned into a really important thing for me, but something that is totally reliant on lots of collaborations, like you say. So over the years, I've worked with Nick Cobby, who did the first video for my new album. He also did a video for my one of my first ever EPs, 10 years ago. So I've been working. There's lots of people I worked with lots of times over the years. Nick Cobby and Kevin McLaughlin and Podrick McLaughlin and Jessica In, and there's all these people. Andy Lomas. There's all these people I've collaborated with a lot, and I just chat to them all the time about ideas. They send me ideas, I send them ideas, and we keep in touch. And just whenever the opportunity arises, we do a project together. So it's just become. It's also a nice way of having a bit of community because being an electronic music producer, I'm on my own all the time in the studio, and I write my music on my own mostly, and I tour on my own. So it's nice to have people I work with who are interested in similar things to me, and we chat about ideas, and it's just nice to have that community as well. But then I also really value their artistic input, in terms of pushing me in new directions musically and challenging me. Um, The Swarm project I did was a short film by the McLaughlin brothers. That was a great example of, they sent me this film they'd done, and I scored to the whole, scene by scene. I had to make the music for every little bit, scene by scene, and it was a great challenge musically, and it pushed me in, directions that I wouldn't have done otherwise. So there's lots of positives from it, really. It's overall, I really enjoy, creatively directing visual content, and collaborating with visual artists, and working with a lot of amazing people, and like yourself as well. The project we did together was really good fun for me. And it was really rewarding musically and creatively, and it's a really beautiful result. So yeah, it's just something I've got really into. It just fits very naturally for me. I think my music is always about a journey and storytelling. That I'd like to have lots of changes, and it evolves always, and something emerges in the piece of music. I always like the music to grow into somewhere new and to travel, and I think it fits very naturally with visual storytelling as well. So there's lots of reasons, but yeah, that's the yeah. Yeah, so that's for a lot of my albums. The last three albums, I would the way I would work would be having the concept for the album, and then starting to structure that into chapters, and then figure out what music could fit with each chapter. So I'm writing the music in those ones. I'm writing the music for a visual idea that's in my head, but I haven't. I may well have already agreed with a particular visual artist to work on that idea. So I have an idea of the aesthetics and what their style is, and then I'm trying to make the music fit with that. So in that sense, the music and the visual are coming simultaneously. And sometimes the visual artist will send me an idea, visual idea, and then I'll change the music to fit that. So there's sort of give and take both ways. With a lot of the albums. With the new album, I did it differently because I was, everyone was. I was stuck at home, and I decided to do this really inward-looking project where instead of starting with a visual idea, I started with the feeling, because it was this idea of unspoken words. What can I communicate with music that I can't communicate with words? So I was trying to express things that felt coherent, emotionally, but then I didn't yet have a visual structure for. So I actually did things the other way around with that one, where the music came first, and then they built the visuals from there. Like, how can I make an analogy of this emotional idea with visuals? And that led to slightly less sciencey, very abstract, a lot of very abstract visual ideas. So I've tried lots of different techniques. I don't have one set way of doing things. And then I also mentioned sometimes that with you guys, you sent me the film, and then I score to the film. And I have done that. So sometimes the visual comes first, sometimes the audio comes first, sometimes they come together. So I've tried lots of different ways, and they have different results, But they all have their pros and cons, really. No, no, I look for. I always find. So I find the visual artist myself, and then I chat to them, and I explain the ideas myself. I basically, it's just me. I try and keep the visual collaborations really just me and the visual artists. I don't involve wider team, just because I find it's a lot more efficient if it's just me, and we can, as you know, doing creative projects with a big team can be really difficult sometimes, because there are lots of different ideas, and you're trying to balance things, So I think for the visual projects, I really like to keep it really focused. But yeah, I find I'm always looking for new people. I'm always looking for new visual artists, and when I find people whose work I love, I'll just say hello, and then we just then when it comes to an album and I have some ideas, I'll have a bunch of ideas I've written down. I want this track to look like this and be about this idea. I'll send a brief to I'll send people a brief and say, is this interesting for you, and then just start chatting. So um the new album, I found, yeah, there's several new artists that I hadn't worked with before, on there. So uh whereas some of the other albums have been more artists I've worked with lots of times, but I just see who's available. It depends on everyone's schedule and who has time. um Most of my visual projects come from my interests in sciences and philosophy. So, for example, on the new album, I had this idea of unspoken words. What can I communicate visually and with music that I can't communicate with words? And then I was thinking about the problems. The philosopher Wittgenstein, Ludwig Wittgenstein, came to mind as someone who had put forward this idea that the problems of philosophy are problems of language. And he had sort of tackled this from the perspective of language, the difficulties with language, and how it's the ambiguities and the problems with our language trying to explain internal states and complex things. So I thought, oh well, there's a philosopher who's doing something that's linked to what I'm trying to do artistically. Maybe we can use his writings for the music videos. So then, for several of the music videos, I chatted to people about how we could then integrate these writings. So one of them, for example, we used a machine learning system which would take the writings from Wittgenstein's text, convert the writings into moving image. So it would create video from the philosophical texts. So you're getting a sort of AI interpretation of these ideas visually, and the ideas it's interpreting are the problems with words. So it was it was a way of essentially it's fusing my interest in philosophy or sciences and technology with the artistic ideas I'm trying to approach. So that's where I'm still really interested. I studied biosciences, but I'm really interested in foundational, essentially the foundation, philosophy of science and the foundations of sciences. And there's so much aesthetics in there. Rule 110 was another great interesting one. I've done lots of cellular automata things, and this emergence project that was full of these this sort of science narrative. So there's all these essentially scientifically and philosophically related visual ideas that I put through, and I spend most of my time when I'm not making music reading philosophy and science and popular science books. I'm just making lots of notes. I have hundreds of ideas for projects. I'll just when I'm traveling, I'll read or listen to audiobooks when I'm traveling for gigs, and I'll just make notes all the time. Oh, it'd be great to do a project about this idea and this. And then when it comes to the albums, I've got hundreds and hundreds of ideas of different visual projects based on my readings and my interests. So that's where it comes from. But to summarize, it's all nature, really. It's just nature is so rich, aesthetically and structurally. And the sciences and philosophy it's all based around our observation of nature and trying to make sense of things. So really the source is nature, really. I love one thing I would add to that would be I love the artistry that is in nature. So a lot of the time when when you're looking at foundations of nature, I don't know, things like quantum physics, for example, really foundational problems, or the nature of the mind, or a lot of the foundational problems in nature are really obscure and sort of there's hypocrisy in there. There's contradictory things, and it turns into art as much as science. And I love when you go really deep in tunneling down to the sort of bedrock of nature. It often turns out to be almost an artistic quality rather than a traditional scientific quality. It has this sort of these contradictory things that shouldn't be in there in a logical system, for example, or Gödel's incompleteness and all these interesting foundational things which have these artistic qualities. Because in the arts, hypocrisy or mutually inconsistent features are very at home in the arts. The arts can incorporate that, and the sciences can't so much. But then those things happen to be in the sciences, at the core, which is I find really interesting. So one of my main things is looking for the art that's hidden in there in the natural world and in the sciences.